Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Nick Soman, CEO and founder of Decent, a healthcare technology company that's raised $43 million in funding. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brett. Nice to be here.
So let's talk about the domain. I've found that when I have guests on with incredible domains like that, there's always an interesting story there. So before we dive into the go-to-market story, let's talk about the domain. How'd you get it?
All right. I got it by spending $60,000 out of my home equity line of credit and really terrifying my wife. And I said, look, I've been sitting on this idea for a while of getting into healthcare. At the time, we were looking at maybe doing something that was blockchain related in healthcare. And I said, boy, this name's available. I want to get it. And I'm going to force myself to go start this company because if I don't raise venture financing and pay myself back in arrears, I might get divorced. And that was a nice motivating factor to go get the name and then go get the money.
Sounds like you have a nice supportive wife then.
I do now.
And then what was that idea? Was that what you're doing today? Did the idea evolve? Like, what was that initial idea that you had to use that domain on?
Yeah, the idea has evolved only a little bit. I think our thought was healthcare is extremely broken in this country. I'm the child of two primary care doctors. I first grew up hearing about compassionate patient care as the end all be all, to the point that my little sister and I were like, do not talk about doctor stuff at the table, please. And then I watched my parents get disenamored of their careers over the course of my older childhood. You know, my mom, who was my hero, passed a couple of years ago. She would say, this is the hardest time to become a doctor in the last 50 years. My dad went from happy primary care doctor to grouchy HMO executive. And I was probably 12 years old, Brett, when he came home, sat down at the table, and he said, I don't think that my counterparts on the insurance side of this organization care about the patient. So that was sort of the moment that I said, I'm not going to follow the family path into medicine. I'm going to do my own thing. And now, just when I thought I was out, it pulled me back in.
Now, excuse my language here, but like, why is healthcare so fucked? Let's start there, trying to unpack that.
Healthcare is fucked because everybody in the largest industry in the country and the largest hiring industry in the country, which is ultimately run by the largest body of lobbying money in the country in DC, is incentivized to see costs go up instead of down. And I could give you every example of this. Some of them are very obvious. Pharma companies make more money when the drugs cost more. Here's the non-obvious one that just still blows my mind. Because of something called a medical loss ratio rule, if I'm an insurance company and I take in $1, I have to spend 80 to 85 cents on care, or I have to give the difference back. And you might think that's really good. Well, that's great. They can't just keep all the money. Here's the problem. It disincentivizes innovation, because if I actually get efficient with your dollar, I have to just give more of it back. Why would I do that? These organizations, most of which aren't evil, but none of them are dumb. And they figured out, hey, according to the current regulatory regime, I'm going to be better off just raising prices so I can take 80 to 85% of a growing pie. Now, I've got an 11-year-old son and a 7-year-old son, Brett. If I took my 7-year-old son to the bakery and I said, you can have 85% of any donut you want, he knows to pick the biggest one. So we're getting what the system was designed to do.
If we look at the whole ecosystem and then put it on a scale of 1 to 10, like we call it the evil scale, which group of the ecosystem is most evil?
What a good question. Which group of the ecosystem is most evil? The finance department at United Healthcare is the most evil. and I'll take my hat off if I had a hat on, because they're evil geniuses. And not everybody at United is bad. And a lot of people who work in managed care are just trying to make a living. And some of them are awesome and they do good work. But the financiers that figured out how to rig the regulation so it rewarded cost escalation and then dance better than anybody else can to that tune, I think they have a special place in hell.
How do we unfuck it? That's the big question I always wonder with healthcare. And like, when I look at some of these things, I'm like, God, there's like billions and billions of dollars here, hundreds of millions in lobbying per year. It's like, there's so much pull going this direction that makes it so hard. Like, how do you fix it? How do we fix it?
We take the power back. And that's really what we're trying to do at Decent. And I'll explain what this means. Decent builds level funded health plans around something called direct primary care. What you need to know about level funded is not very much. What you need to know is it's a version of self-insuring. And every big company in this country self-insures. So when you're looking at Google, they're not going to United Healthcare and saying, hey, we'll pay you if somebody falls down at Google and skins their knee. then we'll pay you United Healthcare because you held that risk. Instead, they do something called self-insuring. They take a big pot of their own money and they say, we're going to cover almost all the risk with this. And then we're just going to go to what are called reinsurers for big insurance that stands in the background in case every single product manager at Google gets pregnant in the same week. Stuff like that, that's very unlikely to happen, but be incredibly expensive if it did. That's where insurance actually should sit. And so what we do at Decent is we take this tool that every big company in the country is using, and we allow groups down to 5 employees to do it. And how we do it, I'd mentioned those big reinsurance companies. Think of it as training wheels on a bicycle. As you get smaller as a company, you need slightly bigger training wheels. And that's what we do, is we've got this reinsurance that's sitting behind, but it doesn't have all those perverse incentives. We actually make more money when people are healthy, when we take good care of them. And that's how I think you unfuck this industry, is you start with the doctors, you build around them, and then you make it profitable to do the right thing.
Now, if a company like, let's say mine, we have about 25 employees, like if we wanted to do this on our own, what would that look like? Just so we can compare, what that experience looks like with these.
Oh, that's so funny. You don't want to do it on your own, or conversely, we'll help you do it on your own. But here's what it actually looks like to do on your own. First, you'd say, Brett, hey, we're going to need some doctors if we're going to have a healthcare system. So then you would start negotiations with the local hospital systems. Yes, plural, because nobody just wants to pick one. And then you might say, well, we need to fill in the gaps with some cash pay imaging centers and some standalone surgeries. And oh, we're going to need some drugs too. Anybody know what a PBM is? So you spend about 2 weeks figuring out what PBM stands for. It's Pharmacy Benefit Manager. It'll take you another month or so to figure out what they do. It's not good. And then what you're going to do is, okay, we've got these drugs, we've got these providers. How do we put that into a health plan? By the way, are there rules around this shit? And then you're going to need to hire a lawyer because stuff's expensive. You're going to put together a plan ultimately that probably looks a lot like the plans that you already know, because you haven't been gunning on this for 7 years and you haven't learned some secrets like the ones that I know, which is if you take this thing called direct primary care, which is the model I wish my unhappy primary care parents had found, which is the model where 8,000 clinicians across this country have said, I got into medicine to provide primary care. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to charge $50 to $100 a month, and people can see me same day or next day. Mm-hmm. And this model works so well on its own. It makes people happier. It reduces their downstream costs. And in fact, and this is a secret that I know you're about to know, podcast listeners will know, nobody else really knows this, but they're really going to know this in a couple of years, Brett. When you put these two things together, the unlimited primary care and the health plan, even though this one costs money and this one costs money, if you do it in the right way, the whole thing costs 40% less. And that's the thing we know at Decent that people don't really know yet. And that's why, as I mentioned earlier, we're starting to go into hypergrowth right now.
40% savings?
40% savings on average versus fully insured market rates.
Wow, that's incredible. Makes sense why you guys are in hypergrowth right now.
It's moving.
Is there an argument against direct primary care? Like, is there a valid argument? Like, are there some people who are saying like, no, there's like downsides to doing this? Like, yeah. I've seen that, pretty much unrelated, but like, pre-nuvo, like those body scans, the health.
Yeah.
Like I hear, everyone talks about those, and I hear there's like some doctors posting on social media, like, no, like don't do those because they're bad for this reason.
Oh, there's always counter arguments. And most of the counter arguments I think are objectively stupid. There's one counter argument that I'll give a little credit to, but then I'll tell you why I think it's the wrong way to look at the world. What Decent does is ultimately we are an arms dealer to this growing movement of direct primary care doctors. And as somebody that's been around the startup world for a while, this is really wonderful. I wake up in the morning excited and fired up to serve them. It's also way, way easier for the same reason that if you were to try to get up on an inner tube and then make yourself go in the lake on an inner tube as fast as possible, you're going to have some trouble getting started. You want to be drafting behind something that's bigger than you, like a boat. And in direct primary care, we found this movement that all we do is serve them. Now, the argument against direct primary care, many people have figured out that there is a primary care shortage in this country, and that is a problem. And the average doctor might see a couple thousand patients at times. And that's a lot of patients. Now, what you could say about direct primary care is, wow, these folks are seeing 300 to 500 patients. So doesn't that just exacerbate an existing deficit in primary care? Here's why I think that argument is ultimately bad. You have to look at the root cause. Why is there a primary care shortage? It's because the primary care doctors are being asked to see 2,000 patients. And the percentage of medical school students that are going into primary care is at all-time low. It's been a precipitous decline. So you're going to need primary care. We have to make this something people want and can live with. And whether it be doctors, or we're actually big fans of nurse practitioners too at Decent that are well-trained and have the right supervision, we can solve this problem by making this a job people want to have.
What are you doing to evangelize this idea of direct primary care? Like I buy healthcare, I buy it through Gusto. Like I didn't even know this like existed. I'm always down to save money. I love saving money. Like, how do you find people like me who aren't even aware that like this is an option?
I'll tell you how we don't find you because we screwed this up. And I know you like thinking about go to market. I learned about direct primary care and I just thought it was the bee's knees, and I still do. And we fucked up our pitch for a while. We would go and we would say, hey, direct primary care. Hey, direct primary care, direct primary care. And people would just immediately go, sounds expensive. And then they would tune out. So this is what we do instead now. We go to you and we say, Brett, what are you paying for your health plan? And you say $800 per employee per month. Mm-hmm. And then I say, what if we could drop that down to 500? Then you go, I'm listening. And then I say, okay, I have this quote for you. It's real and undeniable. And that's when you say, Brett, how do I know this isn't crappy since I know it's cheaper? And then I say, well, have you ever heard of direct primary care? And that's the deal that's closing 50% of targets when we hit our pricing number. I have to explain to you how you're getting so much more for so much less. But the way I evangelize is often just saying, I'm going to go to you with the thing you care most about, which is price. And then I'm going to use direct primary care to explain why we got you the price you wanted. Because if I do it the other way around, people just think it's for concierge services and it doesn't work as good.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode. How long did it take you to get to that point where you figured out that maybe we can say like the narrative stack, right? Where you're kind of positioning things in that order. How long did it take to get that figured out?
I'm going to admit it was an embarrassingly long time. And part of the reason is because I wasn't running sales myself. And then after I started running sales myself, which was a temporary state because our wonderful sales leader had to step away for a minute, then she came back. I'm getting punched in the face every day by the same problem. And as is so often the case, it's easy to pontificate when you're sitting in the CEO's seat. You have to get out there and sell the shit. And all of a sudden, what you got to do is real clear. And that happened here.
Are you still spending a lot of your time in sales, or have you transitioned out of founder-led sales now?
The truth is I just love it. And now that I'm doing it, I feel the lifeblood from it. And I like to conquer. And so, I closed another group today, and there's nothing that feels as good as going, I just increased my company's runway. I just pushed another group of edge cases through my ops machine, which then has to accommodate those edge cases and solve for them for the next group. I'm never going to be away from sales, but I'm really happy to have our leader back. Now I can focus on the strategic sales. And the really cool thing that's happening right now, like the thing that's driving our transition to hypergrowth literally right now, this is, fresh off the beat. We are becoming the plan of choice for the direct primary care doctors themselves. This is really, really powerful. So there are some folks that are adjacent to this movement. It really is a movement. Folks like the Health Rosetta. And they are kind of kingmakers in our space that go, this is how you do a really good health plan. They became a customer and everybody thought, oh, that must be nice for you for revenue. Sure. It must be nice for you because you get to tell people they're a customer. Absolutely. The biggest thing is they started telling us, we know this space as well as you do, if not better. Here's how you can go from good to great. That took us on this path to being able to close these direct primary cares. We're about to close, I won't name names, but the two largest names in direct primary care, each of which affiliate with hundreds of practices across the country, each of which in turn is driving about 90% of its growth from employers. And so there's this opportunity to really be the cool kids of healthcare's health plan. And I think we're leaning into that hard.
You mentioned a word I'm really interested in right now, and that's movement. So I bought a book the other day, and my wife found it. She's like, are you okay? And the book's called How to Start a Cult. And I was reading about how to start a cult, and that ties into this like movement idea. I had Levels on, and they're kind of in the metabolic health movement. And they were unpacking that a little bit of how they're, coordinating with different folks with like Andrew Huberman, the author of Glucose Goddess, different books like that. And they're really, driving that movement forward. What are you doing, with other people in the ecosystem to really create this movement and drive this movement forward?
I love that question. So direct primary care is a true movement. I haven't sat down and defined movement before, but a lot of founders think, oh, my cultish startup is a movement. That's not a movement. You might be able to get to cult status. That's not a movement. To be a movement, you need to be solving a really, really horrible problem for a large number of people. And it needs to be bigger than you. And that's the thing that we've learned from direct primary care. This isn't just a bunch of doctors that woke up one day and said, let's do this different thing. This is doctors like my parents who realized after working their whole lives to be able to do this special thing that they took real serious to take care of people, that their job had been perverted, that they were miserable doing it, that they had the highest suicide rate of any profession. This is way bigger than Nick Soman. This is way bigger than Decent. This is angry and inspired doctors and clinicians across the country that have really started to move. So in fact, what we've learned is best we can do is be the arms dealer to this movement and support the things that they need. I am much more interested at this moment in supporting the growth of direct primary care than even supporting the growth of Decent, because I know the good things that will happen for Decent if we can be in service to this movement. A couple things that we do, just because you asked, I got awarded $1 million grant yesterday, or rather Decent did, but I did do most of the work for the grant application to support this direct primary care movement to take on the next step. And another knock that I would actually levy towards traditional direct primary care, I worry sometimes that will end up be one of those innovations that's really good if you're already privileged. It's really good if you already live in an urban center. But I want to make this available to people in the cornfields as well as I can. So I went and got this grant that allows me to take $1 million of equipment and just distribute it for free to a bunch of DPCs and say, hey, you want to take care of that guy in the cornfield? Maybe you'd like an iPad. Maybe you'd like a computer. Maybe you'd like that cool thing that we've all seen in movies but don't know what it is, which is a robot that drives around, but it has the doctor's head on it on an iPad. These are the things I get to just go give to people. And the hunger, even from our government, which I have my own issues with, to support primary care innovation, especially in underserved communities, is really high. That's something we do. The bigger thing we do, honestly, we just came from the HINT Summit.
Mm-hmm.
How we pitch our business to direct primary care doctors is we bring you members, you take care of them, we pay you your rack rate. If they need care outside of your primary care office, we help you figure out where to send them. And if they go where you want them to go, their care is free. That's a really, really good pitch, Brett. I'm able to close 95+%. And the only ones I can't, they say, hey, my panel's already full. I'm looking to retire pretty soon. I'm not really looking to grow it. And so we serve them by bringing them members, because if you think about these doctors, like my parents, they're really good doctors. Do you remember the first time you started a company and you kind of figured the world would beat its path to your door and it just didn't quite happen that way?
Hmm.
Every single one of them is finding out about the importance of distribution at the same time. And they line up at our booth and they say, hey, I heard that you can bring us members. Thankfully, it's no longer because they read some stupid pitch deck that I made. It's because we brought their friend members. And I'll just give you one final anecdote that was really powerful for me. I connected with a wonderful direct primary care clinician down in Indiana. And then I connected with a broker who said, I happen to have a group that's an 8-minute drive from that clinician's office. We'd like to work with you. Do you know any clinicians near me? And I said, I do. I know this woman, Jessica McCartan. I can give you a name. Jessica McCartan came to the employer last week. Mm-hmm. She stopped in and said, I'm going to be your new clinician. I'm going to provide this direct primary care. The staff was tickled pink because nobody has had an experience like that before. They said, hey, maybe since you're going to be working with us, you can do our pre-employment medical screenings. Maybe you can help us with our work comp. She called me after and said that went so well that I'd been planning to get my own space. I've been renting from another doc, but I might have to put fast forward on those plans because they want me to do everything. And I said, that's good, right? And she said, that's real good. So we have the opportunity to help all these people.
That's amazing. I love that.
It was cool.
What about marketing specifically? Can you unpack the marketing strategy for us?
Yeah, I built the growth team at Gusto, and the thing that I've learned is that marketing is all about finding the one thing that works best, not the 10 things that sort of work. So we spent a whole lot of time trying to define and understand this problem and came to the conclusion in a variety of ways. There is no scaled selling at this point to small businesses without going through the broker channel. And that actually was really freeing for us because I've been part of organizations that I won't name where you kind of bungle the approach to brokers. Or you try to say, yeah, we're going to sell direct, but we'll work with you too, which is like telling somebody, I'd like to marry you, but I'm going to marry her too. It just doesn't work. So we knew that it was going to be brokers. And then we started to fall in love with them as stakeholders. And we said, hey, just like in tech, just like in podcasts, there are some jerks out there that get a bad rap. They aren't the majority. The majority of brokers are trying to do the right thing. They're getting kicked around by United Healthcare. They're getting their commissions shrunk every year by Blue Cross Blue Shield. We said, what if we actually embraced them as a partner and took our skills as a tech company to build tools for them, to build Iron Man suits is the term we use internally. Now we went to brokers and we said, what do you care about? And then I learned some of the things I told you earlier. I care about price. If you can't give me better price, you really got nothing. And then I said, all right, well, to what extreme does that go? What if I were to tell you that I'm going to give you the lowest price I can, but in this plan, it's a self-funded plan. We're going to get your rate as low as it can go. But if there's money left over and we've beaten our projections for how well we can serve you, can I keep that money? And they said, sure. If you can give me the lowest possible rate, keep the money. My client's happy. They're even more happy if there's money left over at the end of the year, because that means that their renewal is also going to be really low. They said, knock yourself out with that. Because I'd said, we don't have to do it that way. You could have the money back at the end of the year and then we could charge a little bit more. And they said, no. Just give me the lowest rate you can. That created a bunch of innovation in our business model. So I could gear our whole thing towards how can we focus day in, day out on taking care of people at a low cost? I never want us to become the kind of company that says, I got my $50, I got $100. What do I care what happens to the member? And they're willing to give up a lot when you can get them a low price and good quality. And I introduced DPC for months in the wrong way. I said, I know you've been looking for something new in your quiver. They all say that same language. It's a Robin Hood industry. And you got to figure out who is King James or King John. The interesting thing, though, is that they don't want to hear that, right? That's weird. That's new. It doesn't solve my problem. Instead, you got to just teach them the same thing I told you earlier. It's cheaper. And then when people say, how do I know this isn't crap? Then you say, now I'm going to tell you about this thing called direct primary care. And just so you've heard some of it from me, Brett, I want to share with you part of why it is cheaper. It's because the DPC can handle 82% of your care. That's a real number. In a plan built around DPC, 82% of members will not have a medical need the DPC can't handle in a year. The second piece is because you get more primary care when you need it with no cost, you get healthier. You don't have as many downstream ER admissions. You lose weight. You may lose your diabetes without ever having to touch a drug. And then the last bit, and this is the part that blew my mind. I thought there's a big, maybe world-changing business that could be built here. I started to look at the math in what's called a preferred network. Now, you probably know enough about healthcare to know that often there's the preferred or the non-preferred network. I had always sort of roughly assumed that the preferred network rates were equivalent no matter where you went. I looked at Austin, Texas, our flagship city. I looked at an MRI, which is the most shoppable, same everywhere service in the world. Unless the machine falls down on you, you're getting an MRI. There is an 8x price difference between the top decile price for an MRI and the bottom decile price for an MRI, 8x. And if you start realizing, well, people listen to their doctor. If their doctor tells them to go to this street corner and not that one, they're going to do it. If I can save them 80%, 90% every time they do that across the whole corpus of care, then all of a sudden I'm looking at not 40%. I want to bring the cost down by 50. I want to lock our rates so they never go up. And I think that's the opportunity we see ahead.
Let's talk a little bit about messaging and branding. So I spent some time on your website earlier before the interview, and I love it. I love the language. It's aggressive. It sticks out. I talk to a lot of healthcare companies, and most of those companies, they look like all the other healthcare companies. You guys don't. Talk to us about intentionality of like the language used at the branding on the website. And I'll, of course, link to it in the show notes so people can see what we're talking about here.
Thank you. I first want to acknowledge that many good things are born out of pain, and this was one of them. So Decent's been through a lot. If you look back at our organization, we were initially launched to serve the self-employed in Texas. Then the feds moved the ball on me and they said, you can't do that anymore because nobody can. You have to go serve small businesses instead. We said, okay, let's band the small businesses together. We'll do it in a PEO. We were on the verge of a national launch last January when we got left at the altar by this carrier partner who I can't name because they gave me money not to sue them. And we've been through plenty. And there was a moment when that happened and we had to let 94% of our team go. It was the most brutal professional experience that I've had. And I wasn't even let go. So my heart goes out to those people. My co-founder, Richard, and I sat down with each other. And we basically said, any reasonable people would probably just give up the rest of the money and go home. We've never really considered ourselves reasonable. And he just said, I don't want to go back to work at Amazon, where we both used to work. And I said, I also don't want to go back to work at Amazon. We ultimately concluded that if we were going to try doing this against all odds, we had to do it our way. And the pirate signage that you see, that I'm wearing the pirate shirt right now, I wear this now every day, largely because it's nice to not have to make a decision. It really came out of like, let's do it our way. Let's do it different. But what we like about it is it does stand out and it attracts the kind of people who would possibly be crazy enough to give a new health plan a shot anyway. I'm not losing anything if I can't get the person who's the HR leader that's always been on blue and she's going to be on blue. And then she looked at my website and she saw the word sucks. She can go ahead and stay offended. I'm sorry that I did that to you, Clarice. But, the opportunity for us isn't with her. It's to find those early adopters. The flag brings them through.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their U.S. and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
How do you find early adopters? That's something that always drives me crazy is like they're the best customers, but they're the hardest to find. Unfortunately, there's not like a LinkedIn tag of like, hey, I'm an early adopter. How are you finding them?
Yeah, there is though. And for us, it's called direct primary care. So here's the deal. Most of the growth in the direct primary care movement before Decent was coming from employers. The single largest objection that employers had was, hey, I want to get this direct primary care thing for my employees. Often they started out as executive individual members, but I've already got my Blue Cross plan. And it sort of feels like I'm paying twice because I know part of that cost is supposed to cover primary care, or I've already got my Blue Cross plan. And it sort of feels like this hand isn't talking to this one. And that seems kind of weird. So we were born to serve their biggest problem. Did we know that? Hell no, we didn't know that. We just said this DPC thing is really cool. But where we are now, they find us because the employer growth is already happening. These people are trusting this DPC more than they trust anyone. And then they're complaining every year about their health plan renewal. And it used to be, well, I wish I had something for you. Or maybe you could try one of these health shares that's not real insurance. I'm not going to knock them, but we end up being a solution largely out of luck and listening, I guess, that solves the DPC's biggest problem. I want to grow. I know that my growth is going to come from employers. I need a better answer to how do I avoid double paying for a health plan? That's what we are.
What drives you to work so hard and to keep moving through these hard moments? You just shared like a couple of hard moments there. The big one that stands out is, 94% layoff. Like, and I'm guessing there's probably many more that you haven't mentioned. Like, what keeps you moving through those shitty times?
I think if I can help solve this problem in a real way, then I'll have lived a life to be proud of.
That's amazing. I love that. It's a great answer. As you think ahead to the next, let's say 12 months, we talked about you're in the midst of hyper growth right now. What's top of mind? Like, what are the big challenges that you're going to have to solve? Like, what's keeping you up at night?
I used to throw parties and I love throwing a good party. And I shared this analogy with you, but I'll double down on it a little bit right now. There's always this time in the party when it's right before and maybe your best friend just showed up, or maybe you're a half hour in and presence is kind of scant because your friends are all a little cool. They show up a little later. You don't really know how it's going to go. You wonder, was this a good use of my time? Does everybody still like me? Do I need to worry about the food that I bought? And I think we spent 7 years building that toward that party, Brett. I spent 7 years. We did see some demand for what we were doing, but we would get the weirdest things. The cops would come in the form of the regulators and say, you can't throw a party here. I don't have an analogy for how it felt to be left at the altar by this carrier partner. So I'll just say, but where we are now, we need to buy more beer, Brett. That's what this is we clearly have a party people want to go to. I'm wondering if our house is big enough. I'm a little worried that we're going to get noise complaints. Like, this is the phase we're in right now. Alternatively, if you haven't thrown a party, have you ever gone fishing? There is something on this line and it's a little bigger than I thought and it's on there pretty good. So I worry about burning my team out. I worry about not being able to serve the demand that's starting to show up. I no longer worry about chasing. And it made me realize what people from Mark Andreessen on have meant when they've said, when you have product market fit, you'll know. I have done so many analyses and so much amplitude regression analysis to try to prove to myself that people wanted this thing that we have. When you have it, you'll know.
Do you ever get worried that the forces that are there, we kind of talked about, the evil players and like the status quo, that the lobbyists or, whatever could come out of that could, force regulation that would strangle the business? Like, do you ever worry about like death by regulation?
Yeah, I really do. I sort of don't have time to worry in general, but that's up there. But I've done a couple of things that I think are helpful. One, it's really helpful to have a big brother who no one wants to mess with. And we've got a big brother in two forms. We've got this 8,000 clinician direct primary care movement. We are in good enough with them now. And I think we've earned and kept their trust enough that if United tries to mess with me, they're going to hear about it from the primary care docs in their community. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, we're working on the same regulatory schema as the largest companies in the country. And so I'll never put it past the ingenuity of the legal sharks, but it would be difficult to fuck with me too directly without also messing with Google and Uber and Facebook. And I like being there.
Yeah. Good company to have, I think.
It is. Yeah. Say what you want, but they've got really good lobbying money.
Something else that you had mentioned that I did want to ask, I had a note for myself. So Gusto, is it Gusto or Gusto?
Gusto.
Gusto.
And thank you for saying decent, not dissent, because I don't understand. I think I'm so stupid that I would call my health plan a decline into nothingness, but decent and Gusto. Yes.
Well, you saved me. Who's the CPO? Tomer, I think is his name. I have him.
He's my old boss. Hi, Tomer.
Okay, nice. I have him coming on my Unicorn Builders podcast, and I was going to say the company name wrong. So glad you cleared that up. But my question there is on the growth side. So you're leading growth teams. Like, what did you learn from that experience, building out that growth org and scaling growth there?
It's a really, really good question. And by the way, I'm quite fond of Tomer. So hi, buddy. And I think what I learned, which I hope won't frustrate anyone, I think what I learned is that when you got something that's working, you double and you triple and you quadruple and you extuple down on it. And I think that was a lesson learned early at Gusto. They did such a good job being that payroll solution for small to mid-sized businesses. And the best things that happened when I was there came from doubling and tripling and quadrupling down on that. And it's also absolutely true that when you have an empathetic heart as a company or as a group of people, you are going to start listening to your customer, and they're going to start bringing these other things to the table that they need to solve. For me, what was ultimately frustrating about my time at Gusto was we got really into selling benefits. That makes a ton of sense. But I felt gated by the fact that the benefits we were selling were the United Healthcare, the Blue Cross Blue Shield, fully insured options. And ultimately, a little bit like you, I suspect, I can't sell something I don't believe in for more than a couple weeks at best. And so I ended up getting to start decent because I said, there has to be a better way to sell this. Interestingly, to come full circle, I've just befriended the BD leader at Gusto, and I didn't say, she said, hey, it seems sort of like we should be offering your plan. So yeah, don't hassle Tomer about that live, but it's really cool how small a world this can be sometimes.
I'll give a little nudge in the pre-interview there for you.
Yeah, just don't like the guy. I like the guy.
Amazing, amazing. Love it. Few more questions. We're almost up on time. Let's talk about money. Let's talk about fundraising. So 43 million raised to date. What have you learned about fundraising throughout this journey?
Oh, what a good question. I've learned that fundraising is a momentum exercise where getting that first domino to fall is so much harder than getting the subsequent dominoes that you might as well completely ignore things like, how am I going to fill out this round? And just ask yourself a question. How am I going to get 30% of the target amount that I've set in the bank with that first check-in? That's the only thing. Second thing that I've learned, and I think this is going to be a little controversial, I think people want to be taken on a journey. I think people want to understand how they can be part of supporting a story that changes the world for the better, because I always try to see the human being behind the role. And there are a lot of venture investors out there who could talk till they're blue in the face about ERC20 tokens. And I know you and I have both spent some time with Lord Satoshi. And, you know, B2B SaaS platform companies, we were most successful when we were able to touch both the head and the heart. And it had to be both of the people we wanted to serve. You always go heart first. You go, look, you've experienced this problem, because experienced venture investor will know that if they have experienced a problem enough that it hurts them, probably lots of other people that have done that too. So it actually becomes the strategic move to say, wouldn't you like to see the world change in this way? Because if you can get them to say yes to that, it's almost a foregone conclusion that you could work with them to build a big business. And our investors, we've had some wonderful ones. We have QED investors that's led our last couple rounds. We have Foundation Capital, who gave me a spot to eat their sandwiches instead of buy my own sandwiches back when I was an EIR back in the day. Charles Hudson at Precursor, and me Kendall at Healthy. There are amazing people on our cap table. Not a one of them has asked me for the money back in the 7 years we've been building this. Now, do they not ask because they know I'd bite their hand off and then publish it on LinkedIn? Probably. But it's also true that they understand that we're a go big or go home company. And right now it looks like we're going big.
If you reflect on this whole journey, you're at hypergrowth. Every founder listening in wants to be at that level too. What do you think you've really gotten right? You know, what did you really nail as an organization and as a leader?
Don't give up has been said so many times. If you are reading this and not believing it, you're a fucking idiot. If you don't understand that that is the single most important thing you can do, then understand that now. And I'm sorry I called you an idiot. The thing is, it's not keep doing stupid things that don't work. It's this company is over when you say it's over. And you're going to have a chance to listen, to make micro pivots. And that's what you should be doing. That's what you should be doing in relationships. That's what you should be doing in the market as well. So I'm not saying just doggedly walk right into that wall. I've run consumer companies that did that. It's no fun. Keep listening. Do not give up. That is the first thing. The second thing is find something that's bigger than you. And I mean that on two levels. I mean that from a motivation standpoint. I mean, find that thing that you wake up going, man, that thing kicked my ass yesterday. I'm going back at it. I don't think I'm done yet. I have a poet that I love called Rainer Maria Rilke. Rilke said, the purpose of life is to be defeated by greater and greater things. Now, if you're a founder out there, you're like me, you don't want to lose. I don't want to be defeated, but I absolutely want a fight that's worth my time. Find a fight that's worth your time. The second way I mean that is find a movement. They are out there. And sometimes you have to listen and put your ear to the ground. I think there are a lot stupider questions you could ask than, hey, what movements do you know about, mom and dad? What movement do you know about, grandpa? What movement do you know about, Gen Z child? You know, that's what you ought to be listening for, because it's much, much easier to create the activation energy to serve a movement than to create an activation energy to start something all on your own. Then the third thing is you need to hire for shared values. That's ultimately bigger than skills. It gets people kicked into a gear that, I'm sorry, I don't care if you were Tony Robbins. People that you want are not doing it for you. They're not even doing it because of your CEO wizardry or your pitch or how cool this opportunity is. The really good people, they have their pick of opportunities and they have to connect to something that's much bigger than them. What we've got going at Decent right now, there's something special in the air over here, and it isn't me. And I think that that's the circumstance you have to create to build something really unique.
Something you mentioned there on your answer to the fundraising question, you said going big. So let's end with a conversation or an answer about going big. What is that big picture vision?
I want to build a white knight version of United Healthcare. I look at the things that are broken in our country. I don't think they will be fixed by our government because the lobbyists have put the population in a stranglehold arguing against the things that would help them. I don't understand why we can't be the ones to do it. I believe it will be done. Let me stop there.
Easy. I love it, man. This was such a fun conversation. I really, really enjoyed this. I got a ton of value. I know the audience is going to as well. Where should founders go if they want to keep up with you and your journey here?
I'm Nick at decent.com. I'm a pathetic and ashamed LinkedIn influencer. I never wanted that for myself, but you can find me on there as well. And yeah, reach out. I probably can't talk till Q1, but I'm always interested in connecting with good people that are authentically trying to solve the hardest problems in the world.
Amazing. I love it, man. Thanks so much for taking the time, especially given the hyper growth you're in. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you, man. Take care.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.